He picked out the tie himself. That's the part I keep coming back to. My son spent 45 minutes in the men's section of Target on a Tuesday night holding up ties one by one under the fluorescent lights, asking me if the navy one looked serious enough. He was 8 years old and he wanted to look serious. He wanted to make his grandfather proud. My father-in-law had been battling prostate cancer for 2 years, and when the oncologist cleared him in March, not cured, but stable. Good numbers. As close to a win as we're going to get. My husband's family decided to throw a celebration dinner. Not a party exactly. More like a gathering. His parents' house out in Naperville. The good dishes out of the cabinet. The kind of Sunday afternoon that's supposed to feel like a memory while you're still inside it. My son Caleb had been talking about it for 3 weeks. He adored my father-in-law the way kids sometimes adore grandparents who have time. The kind of man who would sit on the garage floor and explain exactly how a carburetor worked, who kept a tin of butterscotch candies in his truck and acted surprised every single time Caleb found them. When Caleb found out Grandpa Bill was getting better, he cried. He was at school when my husband got the call, and when I picked him up that afternoon and told him in the parking lot, he put his face in his hands and cried with this full-body relief that made my chest ache. 8 years old, and he already understood what it meant to almost lose someone. So the tie. Navy, small print, clip-on, because we hadn't gotten to the real ones yet. He laid it on his dresser the night before like it was sacred. My husband's older sister. I'll call her my sister-in-law, because that's the most I can bring myself to say about her some days. Had been organizing the dinner. She lives 15 minutes from her parents, volunteers for everything, and has a very specific way of being helpful that somehow always results in her being in charge. Her name is Brooke, her husband is Keith, and their daughter, my niece Harper, is 10. Harper is a perfectly fine child. I want to be clear about that. She is 10, and none of this is her fault. 3 days before the dinner, Brooke texted the family group chat to share the program. She had made a program for a Sunday family dinner. It was a Google Doc with a timeline and everything, appetizers at 2, family remarks at 3:15, photo slideshow that she had put together, dinner at 4. I showed my husband and he laughed and said, "That's Brooke," in the way that meant he didn't have the energy to say anything else. At the bottom of the program, under special moments, it listed, Harper will present Grandpa Bill with a framed photo collage and a card signed by the grandchildren. I read it twice. Then I called my husband over. "Did you know about this?" I asked. He read it. "No." "Did Caleb know about this?" He looked at me. "I don't think so." I want to tell you that I reacted calmly. I want to tell you I took a breath and composed a measured response. What I actually did was set my phone face down on the counter and stand at the kitchen sink staring at the backyard for about 4 minutes. Because this wasn't the first time, this was just the most recent time. Brooke has a gift for making things feel like they were always going to go a certain way. Like, you're the one who misunderstood. Caleb's birthday overlapped with Harper's once, and somehow the family party combined into a joint celebration that was clearly tilted toward Harper's princess theme at age 4. When Caleb got his first basketball hoop in the driveway, Brooke showed up 2 weeks later with a video of Harper doing gymnastics and asked if we could make sure both kids get celebrated equally, as if we had done something wrong by buying our son a basketball hoop. But this one was different, because Caleb had spent 3 weeks talking about Grandpa Bill getting better. Because my husband had told his sister, in that same group chat, that Caleb had cried when he heard the good news. Because she knew, she absolutely knew, and she still put only Harper's name on that Google Doc. My husband texted her privately. He kept it light the way he always does with her because he grew up doing that, keeping things light with Brooke to avoid the version of her that goes cold and makes family events miserable for everyone. He said something like, "Hey, saw the program. Caleb would love to be involved too. Maybe both kids could do the card thing together?" She replied 40 minutes later. The collage was Harper's idea, and she's been working on it for 2 weeks. I think it would feel disorganized to add another element now. Caleb can definitely be in the photos. I read it over my husband's shoulder. He was very still. "He can be in the photos," I said. "I see that." like a background element. I know. He stared at his phone for a long moment and then typed back, understood. And I didn't say anything because I know my husband and I know that particular set of his jaw, and I knew this wasn't over, but I also knew he needed to process it in the way that he processes things, which is quietly and then all at once. The night before the dinner, I sat on the edge of Caleb's bed while he laid out his outfit, the navy tie on the dresser, the khaki pants we'd ironed together. He asked me if I thought Grandpa Bill would cry when he saw the card. What card? I asked before I could stop myself. He looked at me, confused. The card all the grandkids are signing. Aunt Brooke said she was going to have it at the dinner. I kept my face very neutral. When did she tell you that? She texted me, on my iPad. He said it casually, already moving on to debating which shoes. So she had texted him, directly, on his iPad. She had told my 8-year-old that he was going to be part of signing the card. At some point between my husband's message and her reply, she had texted Caleb separately to tell him he was included, while telling my husband he wasn't. I sat there while Caleb held up 2 pairs of shoes. I said the brown ones. I kissed him goodnight. I closed his door. I went downstairs and I told my husband. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "She told him he could sign the card?" "Yes." And then told me it would be disorganized. "Yes." He nodded slowly. I could see him adding it up. "Okay," he said, which meant the opposite of okay. We didn't say much more that night. What I wanted to say was, we should call this out. We should say something. We should not let your son walk into that house tomorrow thinking he's part of something that's been quietly rearranged around him. What I said instead was, how do you want to handle it? Because it was his family and his father's celebration, and I didn't want to make it harder than it already was. He said, "Let's just see how it goes." I didn't sleep well. The drive to Naperville takes about 40 minutes on a Sunday. Caleb talked the whole way. He had a speech prepared, not a formal speech, just things he wanted to say to Grandpa Bill. He'd written them in his school notebook, the one with the soccer ball on the cover. He read them to us from the back seat, haltingly, in the voice of someone who wasn't sure if what they'd written was good enough. It was about how Grandpa Bill had taught him to check the oil in a car, and how he was going to learn to drive as fast as possible so they could work on a car together. It was about butterscotch candies. It was about how scared he'd been and how glad he was now. I looked out the passenger window and said, "That's really good, buddy," and I meant it from somewhere so deep it almost hurt. My mother-in-law met us at the door in her good blouse. She kissed Caleb and told him he looked so handsome, tugged gently on the tie, asked him if he'd picked it himself. He beamed. The house was already full. Brooke and Keith were there, Harper in a dress with a sash, my in-laws' neighbors, a couple of family friends, my husband's uncle who drove in from Rockford. My father-in-law was in his chair in the living room, looking thin but bright-eyed. And when Caleb saw him, he crossed the room and just held on. Didn't say the speech, just held on, and my father-in-law put his arms around him and closed his eyes. I had to look away. For the first hour, everything was fine. Good, even. The appetizers were out. There was a cheese board the size of a cutting board. Someone had brought a peach cobbler that was already half gone. Caleb ran in and out of the backyard with Harper and one of the neighbor kids. My husband sat with his father and talked in the low, easy way that men do when they're relieved and grateful and don't have the words for it. And then Brooke announced it was time for the special presentation. She had a whole setup. She'd brought a small easel and the collage was mounted on it, covered with a piece of cloth. Harper stood beside it with her hands clasped, clearly rehearsed. My mother-in-law made small, delighted sounds. My father-in-law leaned forward in his chair. Brooke said a few words about Harper's hard work, about how the grandchildren wanted to show their grandfather how much he meant to them, about family and love and the strength that had carried them all through the last 2 years. It was genuinely moving. I'm not going to lie about that. Then she said, "And Harper has something special to present." Harper pulled the cloth away, He was a beautiful collage. Photos from over the years, some old ones I'd never seen, my father-in-law holding each grandchild as babies, birthday parties, the garage, Christmas mornings. In the center, a card with a handwritten note from Harper, and then, below it, several names. Caleb's name was not there. I know because I looked. My husband looked, too. I could feel him go still beside me. Caleb was standing at the edge of the group. He'd come in from the backyard when Brooke called everyone over. He was watching the collage, craning his neck to see, and I watched his face as he scanned it and found himself not there. He's 8. He doesn't have a poker face. He looked confused for a second. Then he looked at me, and I saw the question in his face. Did I misunderstand? Was I supposed to sign it? Was there another card? I gave him the smallest nod, the kind that's supposed to mean I see you. We'll talk later. He looked back at the collage. He swallowed. He clapped when everyone else clapped. My husband put his hand on the back of my chair. I put my hand over his. We did not look at each other. My mother-in-law was crying happy tears. My father-in-law was holding the collage carefully in both hands, reading every note. The room was warm and bright, and everyone was talking over each other, and I was watching my son find a reason to look at his shoes. When the group started to break apart and drift back toward food, Caleb slipped out to the backyard again. Quietly. Without making a thing of it, I said to my husband, very low, go talk to him. He was already pushing back his chair. I stayed inside. I fixed a plate I didn't want. Brooke was at the kitchen island with my mother-in-law, clearly pleased, talking about the printing service she'd used for the collage. I moved to the far end of the room. My father-in-law caught my eye and smiled and said, have you tried the cobbler? And I smiled back and said, not yet, and thought, he doesn't know. He thinks it went fine. He thinks all his grandchildren were in that card. My husband was outside for about 10 minutes. When he came back in, his face was composed, but his eyes were a little red. He came straight to me. He's okay, he said quietly. He said he didn't want to make Grandpa's day about him. I put my hand over my mouth for a second. He's 8, I said. I know. He wrote a speech in his soccer notebook about butterscotch candies, and he doesn't want to make it about him. I know. His jaw was tight. I'm going to say something. To Brooke? No. He glanced toward the living room. To my dad. That surprised me. He doesn't do that. He doesn't bring family conflict to his parents. He's always been careful about it, always wanted them to be the neutral ground. I looked at him and I could see that something had shifted. He had added it all up and gotten a number he didn't like, and now he was done being careful about it. What are you going to say? I asked. I don't know yet, he said, but I'm going to fix it. He went to his father. I watched from across the room. He crouched down by the chair so he wasn't looming, kept his voice low. My father-in-law listened, and I saw his expression change. Not anger exactly, more like a quiet hardening. He asked something. My husband answered. He asked something else. My husband nodded. Then my father-in-law looked across the room and said, not loudly but clearly enough to carry, Brooke, can you come here a moment? The room didn't stop, but it shifted, the way rooms do. Brooke came over with the expression of someone who expects a compliment. My mother-in-law drifted closer, sensing something. My father-in-law looked at his daughter and said, evenly, where is Caleb's name on the card? Brooke blinked. The card was Harper's project. I'm not asking about the project, my father-in-law said. I'm asking where Caleb's name is. He's a little young, too. He's 8. Harper is 10. He held the collage up slightly. He is my grandson. He is standing in my backyard right now because he is too kind to make a fuss, and I would like to know why his name is not here. Brooke looked at my husband, then at me, then back at her father. I thought it would be cleaner, too. Brooke, that was it. Just her name. The way my father-in-law said it was not raised, not cruel, just final. The voice of a man who had spent 2 years staring at ceiling tiles in cancer treatment centers and had come out the other side with a very clear idea of what he was not willing to pretend was okay. Brooke said nothing. My mother-in-law put her hand on her husband's arm, not to stop him, just to be near him. "Go get Caleb," my father-in-law said to my husband. My husband went outside. He came back with Caleb, who looked wary in the way kids look when they've been crying and are trying not to show it. He still had the navy tie on, slightly askew. My father-in-law held out his hand, and Caleb went to him, and the old man took his grandson's hand in both of his and said, "I heard you've been waiting to say something to me." Caleb looked up at him. He glanced at me, quick, checking. I nodded. So he said it, not from the notebook. He'd left that in the car. He said it from memory, stumbling a little, saying more times than he would have wanted to. He said the part about the oil and the part about driving and the part about being scared and being glad. He said it to his grandfather's face, close up, in a room that had gone very quiet. When he was done, my father-in-law pulled him in and held on, same as Caleb had done when he first arrived, hours ago. Just held on. After a moment, he pulled back and reached into his shirt pocket. He took out a butterscotch candy, one slightly flattened from being carried, and held it out. He said, "Found one?" Caleb laughed, the kind of laugh that's also almost crying. The room exhaled. Later, after the cobbler and more photographs and the slow goodbye process that takes 45 minutes at a house like that, my father-in-law found me by the door. He pressed something into my hand, a card, the kind you buy at CVS, already written in. "I want Caleb to have this," he said, "so there's no confusion about what I think of him." I opened it in the car on the way home after Caleb fell asleep against the window. My husband drove. The highway unrolled ahead of us, stark and steady. My father-in-law had written to Caleb, "You have your father's patience and your own big heart. Don't ever let anyone make you quiet yourself to keep the peace. That's not kindness. That's just giving people permission to keep doing what they're doing. I love you. Grandpa Bill." I folded it carefully and held it in my lap the rest of the way home. Caleb keeps it in the top drawer of his dresser now, next to the navy tie. I keep thinking about what my father-in-law wrote in that card. Not the part that made me cry, though it did, but the part that made me feel like I'd been carrying something heavy for a long time without realizing it. Don't ever let anyone make you quiet yourself to keep the peace. That's not kindness. That's just giving people permission to keep doing what they're doing. He wrote that for an 8-year-old. But I think he wrote it for me too, because I had been doing exactly that for years, choosing the smooth surface over the honest conversation, watching my son get edged out of things. Subtly, always with plausible deniability, and telling myself it wasn't worth the conflict, telling myself that keeping the family functional was more important than making a point, and what I had actually been doing was teaching Caleb by example that being kind means absorbing things quietly, that love means lowering your head and waiting for it to pass. That's not what I want him to learn. That's not even true. What happened at that dinner wasn't some explosion. Nobody screamed. Nobody threw anything. My father-in-law asked one question in a steady voice in front of people he loved, and that was enough. One honest question, asked by someone who had spent 2 years with a cancer diagnosis, reminding him that time is not something you spend politely waiting for other people to do the right thing. There's something that happens when people get away with small cruelties long enough. They stop registering them as cruelties at all. Brooke didn't think she was doing something wrong. I genuinely believed that. She had rearranged the story in her head until her version was the only one. Harper worked hard. It was Harper's idea. It would be disorganized to change it now. Every justification was technically true, and the whole thing was still wrong. That's how it usually works. The wrongness lives in the gap between what's technically defensible and what's actually decent. And decency, the real kind, not the polite surface version, requires you to notice that gap and care about it even when it costs you something. Even when it's your own kid's moment you're protecting. Especially then. What I want Caleb to take from all of it isn't the drama. It's the part where his grandfather, a man who had every reason to want a perfect afternoon, chose honesty over comfort. That took something. It took the kind of clarity that only comes when you've had enough time, or enough fear, to understand what actually matters. And it took the willingness to act on that understanding, even when it made the room go quiet. I don't think those things come automatically. I think you build them slowly, through small choices, whether to speak or stay silent, whether to let something pass because it's easier, whether to look at your grandson slipping out the back door and decide that his dignity is worth a slightly awkward conversation. Caleb keeps that card in his dresser drawer. He's read it enough times that the fold is starting to wear. I hope when he's older and someone tries to make him feel small in a room full of people, he remembers that a man who had been very sick and very tired looked across that room and said his name out loud. That's the thing about doing the right thing. It doesn't always change the person who did the wrong one, but it stays with the person who needed it. It lives in them. And eventually, if you're lucky, they pass it on.